This is the countdown, the 10 most controversial, widely discussed, and tragic deaths to ever cast a shadow over the 5 rings. Number 10. Sergei Chelyabishvili. The Deadly Dive. Pressure and the Price of Technical Perfection, 1983. In the unforgiving world of Soviet elite athletics, success was the only acceptable outcome. The pressure was not merely internal, it was a state doctrine. It was in this environment that Sergei Chelyabishvili rose, a promising young diver for the Soviet Union whose focus was fixed not on mere Olympic participation, but on technical dominance. While his tragedy did not unfold at the Olympics themselves, the event, the 1983 World University Games, the Universiade in Edmonton, Canada, was a proving ground for future Olympians, and the forces that led to his death were profoundly systemic to the highest levels of global sport. Chelyabishvili was known for his power and his daring. He was scheduled to compete in the men's 10-meter platform event. The 10-meter platform is, by its nature, terrifying. A small, fixed block of concrete jutting 33 feet above a pool of water. To execute a dive from that height requires a blend of athleticism and courage that defies common sense. Yet Sergei and his peers were constantly pushing the envelope, escalating the degree of difficulty required for a medal-contending performance. The dive Chelyabishvili chose to attempt on that fateful July day was the 3.5 somersaults dive, a maneuver considered at the very edge of human capability at the time. This particular dive requires the diver to leap upward and outward with maximum force, execute 3.5 rapid rotations, and enter the water head first, perfectly vertical, creating barely a ripple. The margin for error is measured in millimeters and milliseconds. A slight over-rotation or a failure to achieve the necessary clearance from the platform meant disaster. On the 16th of July, 1983, Sergei mounted the platform. The arena was tense. His coaches and teammates watched, knowing the inherent danger of the chosen dive. He took his final, steadying breaths and launched himself into the air. Initial height and rotation appeared strong, but in the final moments, the dive went catastrophically wrong. He failed to complete the last half somersault. Instead of entering the water with his arms outstretched and body streamlined, Sergei's head slammed violently into the hard, unyielding concrete edge of the platform. The sound of the impact was reportedly sickening, a dull, concussive thud that echoed through the stunned stadium. Sergei plunged into the water, now floating face down. The immediate chaos was total. Coaches, medical staff, and fellow competitors rushed into the pool to pull him out. He was quickly extracted and immediately given CPR, his body already demonstrating the profound, irreversible trauma he had suffered. The dive, designed for technical perfection, had become a scene of brutal, messy reality. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, having sustained massive head trauma. He fought for his life in a coma for 7 excruciating days, a world away from his family and home in the Soviet Union. On July 23, 1983, Sergei succumbed to his injuries and was pronounced dead. He was just 21 years old. The death sent shockwaves far beyond the athletic community. It was a visceral reminder of the human cost exacted by the constant demand for more in elite sports. The narrative that emerged from the Soviet sports machine was typically cold and focused on technical execution, implying the incident was a tragic, singular error. However, the international diving community reacted differently, launching a fierce debate about the safety of the sport and, critically, the difficulty creep that defined high-level competition. The core of the controversy centered on the platform itself. Concrete platforms were and are mandated, but the exposed, sharp edge was a known hazard. The 3.5 somersaults dive, while awarded high points for difficulty, was deemed inherently too risky given the potential for collision. Sergei's death forced the FINA, the International Swimming Federation, to review its entire platform and scoring structure. The tragedy of Sergei Chelibashvili ultimately led to widespread, fundamental changes in diving safety. Platform designs were reevaluated, and safety guidelines for difficult dives were strengthened. While the sport remains highly dangerous, his sacrifice contributed directly to a culture shift away from simply rewarding difficulty at the expense of athlete well-being. The story of Sergei is often overlooked because it wasn't a major Olympic event, yet it remains one of the most chilling examples of a young athlete paying the ultimate price for pushing the boundaries of what is possible. It underscores the immense pressure placed on athletes to innovate under a system that sometimes fails to place a premium on their survival. The echoes of that sickening sound in Edmonton remain a permanent scar on the pursuit of athletic perfection. He was a champion of the Soviet system who was ultimately defeated not by a competitor, but by the concrete stage on which he was meant to triumph. His legacy is etched not in medals, but in the new, safer protocols that protect every diver who steps onto that 10-meter precipice today. Number 9. Nicholas Bochatai, The Fatal Deviation, Collision with the Machine, 1992. The 1992 Winter Olympics in Albertville, France, were the first to feature speed skiing as a demonstration or exhibition sport. It was a discipline that perfectly encapsulated the Olympic spirit of pushing limits, a simple race against gravity where athletes hurtle down a perfectly groomed, steep piste attempting to break the 200 km/h barrier. The Swiss contender Nicholas Bochatai was a central figure in this high-velocity world. A native of the Swiss Alps, Bochatai lived for speed. He was a top competitor and an ambassador for a sport that hoped to shed its fringe label and become a permanent Olympic fixture. The Albertville Games were his chance to shine on the largest stage possible. The core controversy surrounding Bochatai's death stems from its sheer, senseless incongruity. He wasn't killed by an equipment malfunction at 200 km/h or by crashing into a safety net during competition. He was killed by a slow-moving industrial vehicle on a ski slope used for transit in an area that should have been secured. The incident occurred on February 22, 1992. Bochatai was taking a warm-up run down a non-competitive slope. This slope was often used by athletes to traverse between the Olympic Village and the training facilities. Crucially, while this was not the official speed course, it was within the wider Olympic perimeter and, according to athlete testimonies later, was expected to be clear of maintenance machinery during peak athlete hours. On the slope, a large, powerful snow grooming machine was in operation. These vehicles, massive and slow, are typically used at night to prepare the slopes for the next day's activities. At the time of the collision, the vehicle was either moving or stationary, but occupied a position that obscured the line of sight for an athlete moving at speed down the transit slope. The moment of impact was instantaneous and devastating. Bochatai, moving at a high rate of speed, though far below his competitive velocity, came around a blind corner or over a crest and collided directly with the snow grooming vehicle. His injuries were catastrophic. Despite immediate medical attention from personnel nearby, he was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 27 years old. The shocking nature of the death, an Olympic competitor killed by a maintenance tractor on the grounds of the Games, immediately sparked a fierce inquiry into organizational negligence. The official ruling by French police was that it was a tragic accident, citing the visibility issues and the unpredictability of athlete transit. However, many questions remained unanswered, and the public scrutiny was intense. Why was an industrial grooming vehicle operating on a transit path during hours when Olympic athletes were actively using the slope for warm-ups? Was the area properly demarcated or flagged? Were the operators of the vehicle aware of the athlete's schedule and speed patterns? Was there a breakdown in communication between the organizing committee, the slope maintenance team, and the team's safety delegates? The Cheptegei tragedy exposed a critical, often overlooked area of Olympic safety: the logistical organization of the entire vast site, not just the hyper-controlled competition venues. It highlighted the risk inherent in the daily routines of athletes, where one small organizational lapse could lead to irreversible consequences. The fallout was significant, though quiet. Speed skiing never made it past the demonstration phase
and has never been considered a full medal sport since 1992. While the IOC maintains this decision was due to the sport's lack of universality and its extreme inherent danger, the shadow of Cheptegei's collision, a death preventable by simple, proper logistics, certainly contributed to its marginalization. The case stands as a chilling symbol of the unseen dangers in elite sports. Cheptegei trained his entire life to manage the terrifying risks of speed, only to be taken down by a mundane, mechanical failure of site organization. His death served as a harsh lesson for all subsequent Olympic organizing committees, leading to stringent, compartmentalized traffic and maintenance schedules on and near all competition venues. It was a reminder that while the athletes must master the elements, the organizers must master the details. For Nicholas Cheptegei, that mastery came too late. Number 8. Ross Milne and Kazimir K. Kajsper-Petke. The Black Opening to Innsbruck, a double tragedy and the dawn of course safety. The 1964 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck, Austria, were meant to be a celebration of snow and athleticism. Instead, they began under the heaviest shadow cast by two rapid, preventable deaths that forced the International Olympic Committee to confront the brutal realities of speed and danger in winter sports. These two names, Ross Milne and Kazimir K. Kajsper-Petke, are forever intertwined, their separate tragedies marking the beginning of the end for the cavalier attitude toward course safety. Ross Milne, the Australian skier. Ross Milne was a member of the Australian alpine skiing team, a young man from Victoria with immense promise. He was training on the formidable Patrickhoffel downhill course, a track notorious for its steep gradients and blinding speed. In the 1960s, downhill courses were far less protected than they are today. Safety netting was minimal, and natural obstacles, trees, rocks, and uneven terrain just off the course, were often left exposed. On January 25, 1964, during a practice run, Milne lost control at high speed. The prevailing theory suggests he misjudged a corner or encountered a section of difficult snow. The outcome, however, was unambiguous. He slid off the course and collided head-on with a large, unpadded tree. The impact was instantaneous and catastrophic. Milne died instantly from his injuries. His death was devastating for the small Australian delegation and immediately raised serious public questions about the design and safety of the Innsbruck courses. Many athletes complained that the tracks were too fast and that the barriers between the course and the unforgiving Austrian wilderness were simply inadequate. Kazimir K. Kajsper-Petke, the British luger. The controversy deepened just 3 days later, on January 28th, with the death of Kazimir K. Kajsper-Petke, a Polish-born competitor representing Great Britain in the luge event. Petke was preparing for his own high-speed challenge on the Olympic track. Luge is a sport where athletes hurtle down a winding, icy chute feet first on a small sled, achieving incredible velocity with zero protection beyond a helmet. The Innsbruck track was particularly demanding. During a training run, Petke encountered trouble. In the unpredictable physics of luge, he lost control of his sled and was thrown violently from the track. He suffered critical injuries, including a severe head trauma after striking a section of the track's wall or structure. He died shortly after being transported to the hospital. The back-to-back deaths, a skier hitting a tree and a luger hitting a wall, were devastating. They happened before the official opening ceremony and forced a massive, immediate inquiry. The international press seized on the story, painting the 1964 Games as cursed, or worse, as criminally negligent. The post-tragedy inquiry and legacy. The IOC and the Innsbruck Organizing Committee were forced to act swiftly. The immediate and visible changes were numerous. Course reconfiguration. Sections of the downhill course were adjusted, and many of the exposed trees near the downhill skiing run were either felled or heavily padded. Safety barriers. There was a significant, immediate scramble to install more extensive plastic netting and padded walls on the luge and bobsled tracks and at high-risk turns on the ski courses. The tragic reality is that Milne and Sperpetki's lives were the cost of these crucial safety reforms. Prior to 1964, the accepted philosophy was that athletes implicitly accepted the risk of high-speed sports. After Innsbruck, this changed. The concept of course safety engineering, where the organizing committee has a proactive, ethical responsibility to mitigate all preventable risks, was born. The deaths of Milne and Sperpetki led directly to the rigorous safety protocols we take for granted today. The extensive plastic netting that lines the entire length of a downhill course, the padded walls in the final turns of luge and bobsled, and the detailed inspection and certification process now mandatory for all Olympic sliding and skiing venues. It was a reminder that while the athletes must master the elements, the organizers must master the details. For Nicolas Beauchete, that mastery came too late. Number 7. Agnes Tirop. Femicide on the finish line. The silence of domestic betrayal. The career of Agnes Tirop was a testament to the sheer unstoppable power of the human spirit. She was a Kenyan distance runner of phenomenal talent, a world cross-country champion, and an Olympian, representing her nation in the 5,000-meter event at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Just months before her death, she had achieved peak notoriety, shattering the women's 10K road race world record in September 2021. At 25, she was not just an elite athlete, she was a national icon and a symbol of success for young women across East Africa. Tirop trained primarily in Iten, Kenya, a high-altitude town that is the undisputed capital of the world's distance running elite. But behind the serene, sun-drenched training runs, there a dark and insidious problem was brewing: the financial and physical exploitation of successful female runners by their intimate partners. Agnes Tirop's relationship with her partner Ibrahim Rotic was central to this hidden crisis. While Agnes was earning substantial money from race winnings and sponsorships, reports later indicated the relationship was characterized by financial dependence and escalating domestic abuse. The fame and fortune that liberated Tirop professionally seemed to trap her personally. The tragic event unfolded in mid-October 2021. On October 13th, Tirop's family reported her missing after they couldn't reach her. The following day, her body was found in her home in Iten, Kenya. The scene was shocking. She had been stabbed multiple times in the neck and abdomen. The death was brutal, targeted, and immediate. The primary suspect was her partner, Ibrahim Rotic. He fled the scene, sparking a national manhunt. Within hours, Rotic was tracked down and arrested in Mombasa, allegedly attempting to flee the country. During his initial court appearance, the details of the crime cemented the public outrage. This was not a random act of violence. It was a devastating act of femicide, where a successful woman was killed by the person closest to her, allegedly over financial control and domestic control. The reaction was immediate and fierce. Female athletes in Kenya, many of whom had faced similar abuse, coercion, and violence, broke their silence. They marched in the streets in Iten, their tears and anger demanding justice for Agnes Tirop. The outrage transcended sport, becoming a national conversation about the societal failure to protect women, especially high-earning women,
from intimate partner violence.
The case gained global traction, not just due to Tirop's Olympic status, but because it highlighted a pervasive, systematic issue: financial exploitation. Successful female athletes are often targeted by male partners who seek to control their earnings, leading to disputes and violence when control is lost. Cultural silence. A strong culture of silence and shame often prevents these victims from reporting abuse or leaving their partners. Institutional failure. Local authorities and sports organizations were criticized for failing to recognize the visible pattern of abuse in the running community. In the wake of Tirop's murder, the organization Tirop's Angels was formed, dedicated to raising awareness about gender-based violence, GBV, and providing safe spaces and counseling for female athletes. Agnes Tirop's death, while a personal tragedy, became a catalyst for change, forcing Kenyan sports authorities to finally acknowledge and address the scourge of domestic abuse among its most prized athletes. The murder charge against Ibrahim Ratich led to a high-profile court case that dragged on for years. While the legal process unfolded, Agnes Tirop's silence was broken by the thousands of voices speaking out on her behalf. Her story is a painful demonstration that even at the pinnacle of physical strength and global fame, a woman can be utterly defenseless against betrayal in her own home. She ran fast enough to break a world record, but she could not run far enough to escape the darkness in her private life. The memory of Agnes Tirop is now permanently tied to the struggle for justice and safety for all female athletes who dare to succeed. Number 6. Rebecca Cheptegei. The Paris Shadow, the Unheeded Warning, and the Horror of Femicide repeated, 2024. The brutal death of Rebecca Cheptegei stands as one of the most immediate and horrific shadows cast over the recent Olympic movement. The Ugandan marathon runner had just competed for her nation at the Paris 2024 Olympics only weeks before her death, showcasing the epitome of health and dedication on the world stage. Her subsequent murder in September 2024 was not just a tragedy, it was a clear, unheeded warning, a second, agonizing confirmation of the violence endemic in the East African running community, first highlighted by the death of Agnes Tirop. Cheptegei, 33 years old, had recently built a home in Endebess, a training area near Eldoret, Kenya, to be close to the world-class training facilities. Like many elite runners, she lived a disciplined life, focused on maintaining the physical perfection required for marathon running. Her death occurred in the context of a devastating final domestic dispute with her partner, Dixon Diema Marangach. The dispute, according to police and family reports, centered on property and financial control, the same tragic flashpoint seen in Tirop's case. In the days leading up to the attack, the couple was heard arguing intensely. The violence that followed was almost unimaginable in its cruelty. On a Sunday in early September 2024, Diema Marangach allegedly arrived at her home armed with a jerrycan of gasoline. During the confrontation, he doused Cheptegei with the fuel and set her on fire. Cheptegei was rushed to the hospital, having suffered horrific burns over 80% of her body. For 4 days, she fought desperately for her life, demonstrating the same resilience she showed on the marathon course. Tragically, on September 5, 2024, she succumbed to her massive injuries. The news broke globally, sparking a renewed wave of shock, outrage, and international condemnation that was even more strident than the one following Tirop's death. This time, the reaction was framed by the question, how could this happen again? The immediate fallout was critical and addressed the systemic failures that enabled this recurring tragedy. The femicide crisis. Activists and the United Nations openly called the death an act of femicide, emphasizing that this was not a domestic dispute, but a gender-based murder rooted in a desire for control. Failure to intervene. Questions were raised about why no one, either family, coach, or local authority, had intervened following the death of Tirop and the multiple public disputes Cheptegei was reportedly having. The athlete's vulnerability. The case highlighted the immense vulnerability of female athletes who gain significant wealth quickly, often becoming financial targets for partners who resent their independence and success. The alleged perpetrator, Marangach, was also burned in the attack and was treated under police guard at the same hospital. This provided a chilling contrast, the same medical facility caring for the victim and the alleged killer. The legal process for him began shortly after, charged with the murder of the Ugandan national hero.
Rebecca Cheptegei's name is now tragically twinned with Agnes Tirop's. Her death became the definitive, painful reminder that international success, Olympic participation, and athletic dedication offer no shield against domestic violence. Her final agonizing days in the hospital, fighting for her life after the horrific attack, provided a stark contrast to the strength she had demonstrated just weeks earlier on the streets of Paris. Her death, so fresh in the global memory, solidifies a new dark chapter in Olympic history, one defined not by the collapse of a stadium or a catastrophic accident, but by the quiet, cruel horror that occurs behind closed doors. The international community, the IOC, and the African Athletics Federations now face undeniable pressure to move beyond mere condemnation and implement tangible measures to protect their female stars from the men closest to them. Number 5. Alexander Dolly Owen. The Paradox of Perfection, the Untraceable Killer in a Champion's Heart, 2012. If the world were to create the perfect physical specimen for the modern era, it might look like Alexander Dolly Owen. The Norwegian swimmer was the world champion in the 100-meter breaststroke, an Olympic silver medalist from Beijing 2008, and the nation's greatest hope for gold at the upcoming London 2012 Games. He was a symbol of strength and resilience, a status cemented by his emotional World Championship win in 2011, which he dedicated to the victims of the Utøya terrorist attacks back home in Norway. His sudden death just 3 months before the London Olympics was an impossible contradiction. How could a man whose cardiovascular system was arguably one of the most efficient in the world suddenly collapse and die? The tragedy occurred on April 30, 2012, at a high-altitude training camp in Flagstaff, Arizona. Altitude training is a routine, rigorous part of preparing the body for maximum performance, forcing the system to work harder to produce red blood cells. That day, Alexander had completed a light day of training, followed by a relaxed session of golf with his teammates. He was seemingly healthy and happy. His last tweet was a simple, cheerful expression of looking forward to going home. Later that night, he went to take a shower before bed. When he failed to emerge, his teammates grew concerned. They entered his bathroom to find him collapsed, partly on the floor and partly draped over the edge of the bathtub. He had suffered a massive cardiac arrest. Team Dr. Ola Ronson, who was present at the camp, immediately began performing CPR, and paramedics arrived quickly, but all attempts to revive the 26-year-old champion failed. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the Flagstaff Medical Center. The initial confusion and shock were immediately followed by intense international speculation. A cardiac arrest in a professional athlete of this caliber is extremely rare. The internet, media, and even fellow athletes floated theories that ranged from the plausible to the scandalous. Extreme dehydration in the dry, high-altitude air, overtraining and exhaustion, performance-enhancing drugs, doping, a dark but inevitable accusation in any sudden athlete death, suggesting an undetected substance caused blood thickening or heart damage. The Norwegian swimming community and the athlete's family vehemently denied the drug speculation. The truth, however, took time to surface and proved to be a brutal piece of medical irony. The definitive autopsy report concluded that Alexander Dolly Owen's death was caused by an undiagnosed severe coronary artery disease. This disease involved a significant blockage in one of his coronary arteries, a condition that could have been hereditary or developed over time. In essence, while his heart muscle was massively conditioned and strong from years of training, the vessels supplying that muscle were compromised. The sheer strain of high-level training, even during a resting period, was enough to trigger a fatal event. Alexander Dolly Owen was a living paradox, a man whose training maximized his life only to be undone by a flaw his training couldn't detect. He died a champion, his death serving as a permanent, chilling reminder that the pursuit of human perfection carries a hidden lethal risk and that sometimes the strongest heart can be the most fragile.
Number 4. Sammy Wanjiru. The Golden Cage, Wealth, Wives, and the Unanswered Fall, 2011. Sammy Wanjiru was running royalty, He wasn't just a marathon runner. He was the first Kenyan ever to win the Olympic Marathon, claiming gold at the Beijing 2008 Games in a breathtaking display of sustained speed and dominance. He was a phenomenon, young, charismatic, and ferociously talented. His victory sent a seismic wave of pride and elation across Kenya, transforming him overnight into a national treasure, a hero who had ascended from poverty to unimaginable wealth. But the vast fortunes, intense pressure, and international stardom that followed his Olympic triumph proved to be a burden he could not carry. His descent into personal chaos became as public as his victories. He struggled with heavy drinking, domestic volatility, and the complexity of managing his new life and relationships. He had been arrested in December 2010 for threatening his wife, Teresa Njeri, and possession of an illegal AK-47 assault rifle, a stark illustration of the darkness encroaching on his golden life. The tragedy occurred on May 15, 2011, at his home in Nyahururu, Kenya. The generally accepted timeline, based on initial police statements, painted a dramatic scene of domestic violence. Wanjiru returned home late after a night of drinking, accompanied by another woman. His wife, Teresa Njeri, found them together, leading to a violent confrontation. Njeri locked the bedroom door and ran out of the house. Wanjiru, trapped and enraged, attempted to climb down or jump from the balcony of their two-story home, either to stop her from leaving or out of frustration. Wanjiru fell approximately 6 meters to the hard concrete ground. He was rushed to the hospital but died shortly after arrival from internal injuries. He was only 24. The initial police conclusion was suicide or an accident resulting from a drunken rage. However, the official narrative immediately faced massive public and familial dissent, turning the case into one of the most persistent and painful mysteries in Kenyan sports history. The unanswered questions and conspiracy theories. The doubts centered on several crucial, conflicting points. The height versus the injuries. How could a man in peak physical condition, who routinely runs 42 kilometers, die from a fall of less than 20 feet? Wanjiru landed on a hard surface, but experts questioned the severity of the fall relative to his death. The mother's claim. Wanjiru's mother, Hannah Wanjiru, was the most vocal critic of the official story. She stated unequivocally in a subsequent inquest that her son was murdered, possibly by people seeking to control his wealth, and alleged that his wife and others were involved in a conspiracy. The post-mortem contradiction. A chief government pathologist testified during the inquest that he believed Wanjiru was likely hit by a blunt object after he had jumped or was possibly pushed. This testimony introduced the theory of foul play, that the fall might have been the cover-up for a more direct act of violence. For years, the inquest into Wanjiru's death dragged on, unable to conclusively determine whether the death was suicide, accident, or murder. The Kenyan police failed to provide a definitive, credible final answer, leaving the Wanjiru family and the public with a deeply unsettling sense that the truth had been buried. Sammy Wanjiru's death serves as a tragic cautionary tale about the sudden, destabilizing impact of immense wealth and fame on young athletes in contexts of social and financial strain. He ran the perfect marathon in Beijing, achieving the ultimate dream, but he could not outrun the personal demons and volatile dynamics that ultimately cost him his life. His is the story of a golden champion lost in a golden cage. The true circumstances of his fall remain one of the great unsolved Olympic mysteries. Number 3.
Nodar Kumatatashvili, The Whistler Catapult, The Price of Speed and the Scapegoat Strategy, 2010. The image is burned into the collective memory of the 2010 Vancouver Winter Olympics. A young man, a Georgian luger, screaming across the ice, losing control, and being violently ejected over the retaining wall and into a steel pillar. The death of Nodar Kumatatashvili on February 12, 2010, mere hours before the opening ceremony, was not just a tragedy, it was an organizational crisis that exposed the dangerous edge of competitive sport. Nodar, 21 years old, was a first-time Olympian from a family with a luge legacy in the small nation of Georgia. His journey to Vancouver was a source of national pride, but his excitement was quickly tempered by the sheer, terrifying speed of the Whistler Sliding Center track. The Whistler track was infamous. It was built to be the fastest in the world, specifically engineered with complex high G-force curves. During pre-Olympic training, athletes from multiple nations publicly voiced their fear. They were achieving speeds of up to 95 miles per hour, 153 kilometers per hour, far exceeding the original design specifications. The fatal run and the initial inquiry. Kumatatashvili was on his sixth and final training run of the day when the tragedy occurred. The incident was captured on video and replayed endlessly in the subsequent days, fueling the controversy. The error. Exiting Curve 15, a notoriously complex bend nicknamed Thunderbird, Nodar was slightly late in correcting his steering. The catapult. The high speed and the aggressive angle of the curve caused his sled to strike the ice wall at an exceptional, unseen angle. Instead of braking or bouncing, the sled acted like a catapult, launching him violently into the air. The impact. He was thrown over the retaining wall and directly into an exposed steel support pillar located just outside the track. Nodar died instantly from the massive blunt force trauma. The immediate reaction from the sporting bodies, the IFL, and the Vancouver Organizing Committee was swift and deeply controversial. Within 24 hours, they released a statement concluding that the crash was primarily due to human error by Kumatatashvili, stating he was late coming out of the final curve and failed to compensate. This narrative was widely perceived as an attempt to scapegoat the dead athlete and shield the organizers and the track designers. The outcry was massive, centered on two undeniable facts. Track design flaw. If a single driving error could lead to an athlete being ejected over the wall and into an exposed, non-padded metal support pole, the track design itself was fundamentally flawed. Immediate changes. The day after the crash, officials lowered the start gate for the men's competition to reduce maximum speed and erected a wooden barrier to cover the exposed pillar. These actions tacitly admitted that the track, as originally configured, was unsafe, contradicting their own human error finding. The coroner's report later acknowledged that Nodar's error contributed to the event, but emphasized that no athlete could have been expected to control the catapult effect the sled experienced due to the unique speed and curve profile. The legacy of Nodar Kumatatashvili is immense tragedy and ultimate accountability. The Vancouver organizers were forced to acknowledge a moral, if not legal, responsibility. His death cemented the post-1964 standard set by Milne and Cheptegei that speed must always be subservient to safety in modern Olympic venue design.
Every luge, bobsled, and skeleton track built since Vancouver is now scrutinized with the image of that exposed steel pole in mind, ensuring that the sheer pursuit of speed never again
for the Israeli delegation. On the morning of September 5th, 1972, this vision of peace was shattered forever. The Palestinian terrorist group Black September executed a meticulous, planned attack on the Israeli residents at 31 Kamristrasse in the Olympic Village. David Mark Berger, an American-born weightlifter competing for Israel, was one of the 11 men murdered during the 18-hour crisis. Berger was not just an athlete. He held a master's degree in business and was pursuing his PhD in law. He represented the intellectual and athletic promise of his nation. The breach and the standoff. In the pre-dawn hours, 8 armed Black September members, exploiting the notoriously lax security. The 6-foot-high fence surrounding the village was often scaled by athletes and journalists for convenience, entered the Israeli compound. The intrusion was detected by wrestling coach Moshe Weinberg and referee Yosef Gutfreund. In the ensuing struggle, Weinberg was shot dead while trying to buy time for his teammates to escape. Yosef Romano, a weightlifter, was castrated and killed after seizing an intruder's gun. 9 Israelis, including David Mark Berger, were taken hostage. The terrorists demanded the release of 234 Palestinian prisoners held in Israel and 2 left-wing German terrorists. The Israeli government, under Prime Minister Golda Meir, firmly refused to negotiate, adhering to a long-standing policy against terrorism. The scene became a global spectacle, watched by nearly 1 billion people on live television, a surreal clash between political terror and athletic idealism. The disastrous rescue attempt. The tragedy culminated in a series of catastrophic German security failures. Initial plan abandoned. An initial rescue plan in the village was aborted when the terrorists saw the police approaching on live television. The lull. The terrorists demanded passage to Cairo. German officials agreed, but it was a deception. 2 helicopters transported the terrorists and their blindfolded, bound hostages to the isolated Fürstenbrück Air Base, where a Lufthansa 727 jet awaited. The execution. The German rescue plan at the airbase was critically flawed. The 5 police snipers used were not trained for precision shooting, were armed with standard assault rifles, not sniper weapons, and lacked radios for coordination. The police officers designated to neutralize the terrorists on the plane abandoned their positions at the last minute. Armored vehicles arrived late, snarled by traffic. When the terrorists realized the trap, a devastating firefight began. The poorly positioned and equipped snipers were ineffective. The operation descended into chaos. In the ensuing mayhem, a terrorist tossed a hand grenade into 1 helicopter, carrying 5 hostages. Killing 4 instantly, the 5th died of smoke inhalation. Another terrorist sprayed the 2nd helicopter with gunfire, killing the remaining 5 hostages, including David Mark Berger. The legacy of negligence. In total, 11 Israeli athletes and coaches and 1 West German police officer were killed. The Munich Massacre remains the darkest single event in Olympic history. The fallout was an immediate, ruthless reckoning. Global security shift. The massacre established the need for massive, professional, and heavily armed security at all major international events. Counterterrorism. The failure prompted the creation of elite counterterrorism units worldwide, most famously Germany's GSG-9 and the development of Israel's specialized intelligence and counter-terror operations. Olympic shame.
The decision by the IOC to continue the Games after a mere 24-hour suspension was viewed by many as a profound failure of moral responsibility. David Mark Berger, the intellectual giant and dedicated athlete, became the symbol of innocent American life lost to political violence on foreign soil. The Munich Massacre was not an accident of sport, but a failure of global security and political will, and its immense human cost changed the Olympic landscape forever, concluding the dream of the Peace Games with an irreversible nightmare. Number 1. Ross Milne and Kazimir K. Skripetsky. The ultimate catalyst, the twin sacrifices.
Accountability. If you believe the truth behind these sudden deaths matters, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments on which case shocked you the most, and subscribe for the most in-depth, professional, and uncompromising true crime documentaries on the world of elite sports.